This video will show the genetic results for estimation of the first human ancestor. That's called a search for the most recent common ancestor, in this case, the most recent common ancestor of human beings. As you are aware, these last few videos before this and the few that follow it are attempting to answer these questions. Did Adam and Eve really exist? Did Noah and the flood really happen? Are thousand-year lifetimes possible, and where did the human races come from? And attempting to give these parts of Genesis technical support, technical information that show that all of these things are reasonable, possible, and likely did happen. Our discussion of the first human ancestors will answer these two questions. Did Adam and Eve really exist? Did Noah and the flood really happen? Hopefully you have looked at the prior video about DNA and DNA clocks, because this will be used as an application to this video. Hopefully you have looked at the prior video, and this is the same slide from that video where we start out with geneticists getting some DNA samples from a group of males or group of females. They measure the variation of that a particular type of DNA, whether it's Y chromosomes from males or mitochondrial DNA from females, and once they have that level of variation, then they apply this rule of somewhere between 2 to 4% variation being the amount that this should vary per million years, and they end up with looking backwards at the data and whether the 2% or 4% rule to define a range during which that particular set of DNA would have existed. As I told you in the prior video, this happens to be for female mitochondrial DNA, one of the first tests done that showed somewhere between about 60,000 and 65,000 years ago and 125,000 years ago the first female existed, the female that had the original DNA, which was unaltered initially. Now, there have been a total of 9 tests that were conducted for males and females, and what I have chosen to do here is to concentrate on 5 of those tests and show you the results in the plot at the left for 5 of those tests. And I'll explain to you why I excluded 4 in a minute and show you what the result would have been if we had included those additional 4 tests. But what we're looking at here is the dashed lines here reflecting the several tests that were done for females, and the solid lines the tests that were done for males. And we see that in this case, with these 5 tests, the average for the males was about 65,000 years ago, and the average for the females was about 175,000 years ago. Now, the female tests were generally done first, with numbers somewhere in the range of 200,000 being gained in most of those. And after the female tests were done, some male tests were started and were done, and as a result, several more male tests were done because the results were so different. Geneticists had expected that the first male and the first female would have existed at approximately the same measured time. That only makes sense given what we know about human reproduction, and what was expected there was that we'd get a male somewhere around 200,000 and a female somewhere around 200,000, and that would be the original or the most recent common ancestors for males and females. Instead, we got this results that did not seem to agree with what had been expected. I was much amazed to have read one of the technical articles when the male results were presented, and the author or authors actually made the statement in a reviewed, edited technical paper that they didn't think that this could be Adam and Eve in these 2 different results because the fact that Adam and Eve never would have been able to date. It's a rather offensive comment to make to those who believe in biblical creation, and it turns out, though this probably was in the nature of a joke, I was surprised it got through the editors of the magazine, but you'll see in a few minutes that the joke actually is on the author, because there is a good explanation in the Bible for these 2 different results. We'll see that shortly. But let's say a few more things about why these other 4 tests were not included in the plot that you see at the left. And the reason I did not include these was because these 4 tests included chimpanzee DNA. The going theory among evolutionists was that humans descended from chimpanzees, and so they were looking for a number for the most recent common ancestor being a chimpanzee, having existed approximately 5 to or more than 5 million years ago. So they're looking for that kind of an answer. And at later tests that were done included chimpanzee DNA in an attempt to change the data to be something closer to what was expected millions of years ago at the very least. And so I excluded that. However, if all of the 9 tests are considered together, one still ends up with a rather large discrepancy between the male results and the female results. The presence of the chimpanzee DNA increases the ages a little bit from 175,000 to 210 for females and from 65,000 to 110,000 for males. But there is still this large discrepancy between males and females, which geneticists don't have much of an explanation for, but which the Bible, as we'll see in a second, has a very good explanation for. So let's look what Genesis has to say about what happened during the time of Noah and Adam and Eve, and see if it provides an explanation for the genetic results that appear to conflict with the expectation of genetic researchers. We're looking at here is a set of trees of life. If you remember from one of the earliest videos, we had the theory of evolution represented by a tree of life in which there was a single-celled animal down here at the base of the tree, and all the various plants and animals from amphibians and birds and ending up in humans at the top, representing the tree of life, how all animals and plants evolved from a initial single-celled animal and resulted in the top of the tree being humans. Well, this is a tree that is just for the female human beings, and so we have Eve as the base of this tree, and we have the females that resulted from Eve currently living today represented as the top of this tree. So Eve had daughters, and the daughters had daughters, and all of the various females that existed over all of the time are representative as the various branches of this tree, and the current females alive today are those at the top of the tree. And as we saw in the prior slide, that represents about 175,000 years during which this entire thing happened, from Eve to the world's current population. Now, in order to understand the male part of the tree, you need to be aware a little bit about what the story is in Genesis for Noah and the flood. Genesis reports that at the time of Noah, human inhabitants of earth had messed up so much and were so sinful and bad that God decided to eliminate all of the humans except Noah and his immediate family, and he sent a flood upon the earth. And it turns out, we didn't get into it in any of these slides, but a localized flood in the Mideast type area to eliminate all the human beings that lived at that time except Noah and his family. Now, it's important to know the details of those people that were on the ark. We had Noah and his wife. We had Noah's 3 sons, and we had the additional 3 wives of those 3 sons. So there were a total of 8 people, 4 males, 4 females. The 4 males, Noah and his 3 sons, were virtually identical in their Y chromosome, would say the odds. Remember that Y chromosomes mutate, change every 100 to 1,000 generations of males, and so it's very, very, very likely that Noah and his 3 sons had basically or totally identical Y chromosome DNA. Whereas the females were a bit different. There's no report that the females were related to one another in any intimate way, that they weren't mother and 3 daughters, certainly, and they were not sisters. The 3 wives of the 3 sons of Noah were not sisters, and so they represented a wider spread of DNA, and in particular, these 4 females that were on the ark somewhere around here, they represented a wider spread of DNA from all the females that had preceded them. However, on the male side of things, at the time of Adam, we had Adam and all of his sons and all of the males that had proceeded up to the point of the time of the flood. But at that time, all of the male Y chromosomes were wiped out except that of Noah and his 3 sons. So the Y chromosomes that moved forward from the time of Noah were basically Noah's, and then they spread out and have the current male population of the world today. The timing that we saw in the prior slide was that occurred about 65,000 years ago. So the point is that not only does that genetic information make sense, but it supports Eve and presumably Adam at that time, though it is now not possible to measure when the first Adam occurred, when the first Adam lived, because his DNA has been lost, his Y chromosome information has been lost. But we can find another male, Noah, who is the ancestor of those males currently living on Earth. We point to him as our most recent common ancestor because all the rest of the DNA was lost at the flood. So that is a rather interesting explanation, and as I said earlier, the author who said that these results show that Eve and Adam could not have dated, the laugh is on him, the joke is on him. He should have read the Bible a little further and realized that what the DNA test results for male Y chromosomes were pointing to was Noah. Now, in order to put the results for Adam and Eve and Noah into perspective, I show a plot here of the time that we believe it's actually about 177,000 years ago is a real average of Adam and Eve having existed, been the first humans on Earth, and then about 65,000 years for Noah and his sons. What I've shown here are additional societies that we think of as being ancient or old, and when they existed: the Chinese, the American Indians, some Ice Age Eurasians, Mongols, and something known as the Sunda, New Guinea. These were all prior to this time number that we currently have for Noah, about 65,000 years ago. There is one society that paleontologists believe to be a human society, though it's not absolutely for sure at this point in time, known as the Clayses. And it was a series of cave dwellers that lived in a certain part of the world. I believe it was the Claysis River in Australia, though I'm not absolutely sure of that. I have to look that up in the book. But basically there was one society that is in between Noah and Adam and Eve. And I guess the important thing is that there are no societies that we have any reports of prior to this time of Adam and Eve. So this ViewBrack slide just gives you a little bit of confidence that the results that have been found for the first female and the first male, and in this case Noah, are in agreement with, or not in conflict with, what we know about ancient human societies. So finally, let's just conclude what we've learned as a result of looking at for the first human and the first male and first female humans that can result from studies of genetics of DNA. And again, the DNA, hopefully you've seen, is again this complex, unbelievable thing which now enables us to find the first male and first female back in history. That is something that has disproved evolution, and it is something that needs to be accounted for in evolution. And we have found that the first human ancestors, Adam and Eve, or for sure Eve, but quite likely Adam, lived about 175,000 years ago. We get that from mitochondrial DNA genetic studies, and it is important for the females of this world to realize that their current ancestor, that the first ancestors of their DNA points back to, is someone about 175,000 years ago that we will call Eve, or mitochondrial Eve in the technical literature. Males, turns out, point back to Noah about 65,000 years ago, and that comes from Y chromosome studies. And it's evidence, again, with the explanation that you've just seen, it's evidence that something about like Noah did happen. It's not absolute proof, but it's certainly scientific support, scientific evidence. that something like Adam and the flood did happen, because men on Earth now are so different in their DNA and they point back to a much earlier time. In any event, hope you will continue to view the remaining few videos, and at that point give me some comments on what you think.